Hi, class. This week, our topics focus on human rights policing, social interactions, evolution of human rights, the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, the history of policing. Gave a lecture on that already last week. Um, and we're going to look at specifically chapter 2. So I'm following along the PowerPoint that I already posted on Canvas, so you can follow along the PowerPoint if you'd like. But our assigned readings, I'll talk about them in a little while. But Introduction and Cops of the World Unite, but under human rights policing, human rights, word without meaning, bark without bite, the nature and meaning of human rights, three types of human rights policing, social interactions, examples of three types of human rights policing, social interactions, the evolution of human rights, and the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And then human rights from the perspective of police officers. So read that. Next week we'll do um, the next chapter, chapter 3, which is who watches the watchman, defining power, and from where does power derive, human agency versus determinism, the power of human agency in policing, a story from inside the New Orleans Police Department, and threats to human rights policing, mainly moral panics and the manufacturing of folk devils, very important in sociology. And so um, let's see here. What I'd like to talk to you a little bit about, in the PowerPoint, I have like the history of police in the United States, which is something that we did last week, but I still just kept that in the PowerPoint anyhow. Um, but nonetheless, I want to talk to you a little bit about your community engaged research projects and mainly your the methods that are involved. And I put in the introduction to week 3. Um, a little bit about what you should be doing with the community organization, um, that you might want to start thinking about what are the main focal concerns or important issues that's facing your community organization or members, what resources do they need, what are their central problems or their focal concerns, what role can police play advocating for the human rights of that community organization. But you also want to learn as much as you can about your community organization, its history, how did it start, why did it start, what was it in response to, what are its goals, objectives, activities? How has it progressed? How has it changed over time? What are their hopes for the future? What do they hope to accomplish? So all that's a good starting point. So learn about that community organization, the community members, um, and you want to start, writing all of this down, because everything that you write down, that's going to be part of that final paper as well. Um, and so sociologists, at least sociologists like me, what we do is something called the ethnographic method, where scholars like me, we leave the confines of our communities, of our homes, of the university, and we largely go into previously unfamiliar places to learn about social life firsthand. So we'll spend months, in fact, even years, going into the community, going into schools, going into churches, going into brothels, going into corner bars, hanging out in street corners, going into boxing rings, and learning about social life firsthand. And one of our goals um, in this process is not to only understand the objective structural conditions that give rise to social problems that impact people on a real material basis and that cause real material types of suffering and challenges, but to also have what we call verstehen, or a radical sense of empathy, which means to understand the actor's point of view. Our task as sociologists is to understand how other people view the world, to understand their subjectivity, all the different colors and meanings that they give to their experiences. We want to be able, as best as possible, to understand their subjective experiences of joy, of suffering, of fear, of excitement, their emotions, their triumphs and their failures, their insecurities, and the things that they're most proud of, to really be able to see the world and understand the world from their point of view, to feel their emotions, to experience what they experience. And so although you can't really completely do that in the course of one semester, that is your task to at least do a little bit of that, to go and learn about the community members of the community organization that you want to write about for this community engaged research project. What are their focal concerns? What are their greatest challenges? What kinds of resources do they need? Um, Things about that. What makes them tick, right? And what role can police play? And keep in mind that part of the book that I wrote is part of a larger process of what I'm hoping that you can help me accomplish, and it's how to transform policing from an institution of social control to an institution that supports the human rights of community members, especially the most vulnerable ones. And so it's a kind of a radical concept to transform policing from a social control institution to a human rights organization. But I believe that this path forward is possible, and I think it would better the human species. And so, how do we start? Well, we need to get the voices of community members. What are their focal concerns? What resources do they need? How would they like to be policed in a way that protects their human rights? And so that's going to be your job for this class assignment for your community engaged research projects. And I'll say a little bit about methods. I have the interview guidelines that are provided to you on Canvas, but know that there's different types of interviews. There's highly structured interviews where you know all the exact questions you're going to ask, like in a survey, and you ask everyone the same type of questions no matter what. Generally, hopefully, you won't be doing highly structured interviews because it doesn't really leave any flexibility for larger conversations. Then there's semi-structured interviews, which I think most of you should do. In fact, my interview guidelines kind of follow a semi-structured approach where you pick 3 or 4 major themes that you think are most important to your community members, and you ask questions from within those themes. So you might want to develop now 3 or 4 themes that you think are most important to ask the community members or community organization that you're interested in for your project, and to have some sample questions from within each of those themes. And you begin to ask questions, and as they begin to give responses, you can ask more questions from within those themes. If they tell you things that don't really belong in a theme, then you can create a new theme since you're learning more as you're continuing to do research. And what's most important when you ask questions that elicit stories. You want to get people talking. So if they say, oh, well, this is a big problem in our community, then you can say, well, can you give me an example? Can you give me a story that highlights this central concern of yours? So you want to get them talking. You want to ask questions that elicit stories. You want people to become storytellers and to give examples. If they're only giving small, short answers or replies, that's your fault as an interviewer. Again, you want to ask questions that elicit stories. You want to have them engage in storytelling, and you want them to give examples to explain what they're talking about. So make sure you ask probing questions. And then there's, of course, unstructured interviews, which, again, that's probably not what you're doing because you want to have those themes. And unstructured interviews is where you don't really know what's going to happen or what to expect. You're just kind of asking questions based upon things that you're observing. When I did Down and Out New Orleans with Columbia University Press, it was all unstructured interviews. But I think for your class projects here, you want to do semi-structured interviews where you have 3 or 4 of the most important themes that you want to focus on, and then you ask questions from within those themes. And so you want to start preparing that now. Again, I have the interview guideline that I provided on Canvas. I think the introductory module. So you can use that guideline, but tweak it for yourselves. The other thing I want to talk about when it comes to methodology is the idea of observation, or what we call participant observation. Of course, participant observation can go range from full immersion, full participation into the lives of the community members that you want to understand, to fully only observing like a fly in the wall. But most of us engage in some type of combination of the two, where we participate and we also observe. So, for example, if you were studying the homeless community, like I did partially when I did Down and Out New Orleans. I actually lived among the homeless for weeks, squatting in vacant housings, staying at homeless shelters, and staying inside of tent cities. And so, obviously, you don't need to do something like that, but I was participating in the lives of the community members that I wanted to understand. At other times, I would just kind of observe and watch. And so, um, you have to decide for yourself to what level you'll observe and participate into the lives of community members. And so, if you're studying homeless people or if you're studying like school resource officers, you want to spend time observing and participating in the behaviors. If you're doing homeless, you can volunteer at a homeless shelter, for example, for a few days. That would be kind of participant observation there. If you're studying school resource officers, you might want to go along with them. It's called the go along approach, where you actually spend a day shadowing a school resource officer, asking them questions as they're making decisions, as they're interacting with kids. And in that way, you get to really learn a lot. And um, so the two main things that you're going to be doing for your methods in this class is interviewing people with semi-structured interviews that I just explained to you, and also engaging in participant observation, where you'll be doing some balance of participating and observing the community members of the community organization that you're focusing on for your community engaged research projects. Um, okay, so you can go back and listen to this and take notes if you'd like. Um, okay, so let me look back at the book here. Here you go. You're doing human rights policing. Let me just see if there's any points I want to say as you read it. Connecting human rights to policing. I start off with an Orwell quote, and I talk about this kind of introduction. And it's something that I said before that human rights, um, although it's a new concept in human civilization that came in the aftermath of the horrors of the Holocaust, world wars. Um, it's not a concept that's ever really been practiced in any meaningful way in our society. And so our goal, I think, for this class is to talk about and to figure out how we can turn human rights from a concept into something that's a lived experience, to something that is practiced. And what better way than to start with law enforcement, especially if we can convert or transform law enforcement from an institution of social control into a human rights institution, perhaps the greatest domestic human rights institution the world has ever known. And so I talk about, cops of the world uniting under this concept of human rights, which I think really takes away this us against them mentality. If police officers start thinking about protecting the human rights of community members, especially the most vulnerable community members, um, then that goes a long way into advancing the goals of human rights policing. And then, of course, I talk about human rights words without meaning, bark without bite. It's exactly what you would think it is. I have some quotes there from Orwell as well, um, from Politics in the English Language, which I think is one of the greatest essays probably ever written, really. And it's more relevant today than probably at the time when Orwell was writing. Um, where he says, um, well, just read the quote. He talks about how words like have lost its meaning, like fascism or communism or socialism. And so today we use words like, a Russian spy, things like that. And so it's kind of interesting just how relevant um, those words are today. Anyhow, so I talk about also the nature and the meaning of human rights. Um, and I lay out Donnelly's three major forms of social interaction involving rights, and then I take that in the next section and I apply that to policing. And what's more, I offer in the book, I had police officers that actually contributed to this. As you well know, I currently teach police officers around the United States how to apply policing to their jobs, and the best of my that are in my class, I got them to write an excerpt here on how they were able to apply these different forms of human rights to their actual police work. So check that out. Then I give a bit of the history of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. So check out that history. I think it's very important. And Hey, I even put some of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights in the book, but I check it out yourself. I think I put a PDF of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. Read it. It's a rather radical document, far more radical than the United States Constitution, which empowered the ruling class. The United States Constitution was never meant to empower people like you and me. Keep in mind that the American Revolution was a bourgeois revolution against the aristocracy. It was never meant to give people like you and I any form of power at all. It was meant to give power to the ruling class. And since, of course, the writing of the US Constitution, a small, tiny cabal of corporate and political elites have run this country, controlled all of our institutions, and shaped our history, rendering us largely impotent to control the affairs of the country and even our communities. And so anyway, check out the Declaration of Human Rights. And here I also have police officers talking about what human rights they think are most important to policing and how they have or would apply them to their own police work. So you get from my own father, Pedro, from Chief Roland Camacho, Pennsylvania Chief of Police, and from Chief Alan Hill, actually from the UWL campus police. And then, okay, then you have a discussion board, and click up here. Your discussion board will ask you to read the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant of Human Rights. And then there's two parts, and that's kind of putting yourself in the perspective of a cop and how you would apply those three different types of, to give examples of those three different types of human rights policing interactions. There's one example per each type. And then second, what do you think are the most pressing human rights for policing in our criminal justice today? And keep in mind that I say for policing and or criminal justice, so you can talk about from the perspective of maybe a lawyer or a criminal justice advocate or any type of criminal justice professional, or from SRO, school resource officer. So you have some flexibility there. Okay, well, that's all I have for now. I look forward to another strong week. Keep up your solid efforts. Keep making contact with your community organization. And I look forward to another good week of class. Keep up the good work. Thank you.